Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, folks. Thanks once again for joining us in this event. So, my name is Vignesh Ganesan, and our session today is going to be on Microsoft 365 security and compliance services, when to use what, right? So, um, that is the reason why I chose this very topic. And as I proceed further in today's session, I'll try to talk in detail about why exactly this specific topic and why is this topic even a matter of prime importance in the current scenario, right? So, as I said, my name is Vignesh Ganeshan and I work as a cloud security architect. So, with no further ado, let's dive into the session. So, what to expect from today's session, right? So, you can expect today's session is I'm not going to do a lot of demos, not a lot of technical stuff, right? Just think of this as a session like wherein maybe you've been hired as a consultant or an architect or maybe as a CIO or CTO or a CISO, right? Wherein you've been brought in and you're helping to take care of the security and compliance posture of your organization, right? And you're dealing with Microsoft 365 as one of the solution areas. Then how we need to start looking at those solutions, right? So there are a lot of components in this. So of course it could be quite overwhelming with so many features and solutions there. So how do you need to categorize this? How do you need to start looking at these solutions, and then how can you be more successful with your role? That's what this session is all about. So just in case if you want to munch something, take it at ease, feel free to do that, because I don't really want you to pay very close attention to the screen because we are not really doing a lot of demos today. So to begin with, we'll try to understand what is your existing role with your current company, right? What kind of role you're into, what hat you're wearing there. Then we'll sort of dive and try to understand what's causing the confusion, right? So as I said, there are a lot of components in when it comes to the Microsoft security and compliance offerings, right? I can think of at least 30 to 40 services which Microsoft has bought under this umbrella. And of course, it's leading to quite a confusion, right? So if you're one among those people who already had this figured out, then you're welcome to skip the session. But then if you're one among like me, wherein who started doing cybersecurity very recently and you're trying to understand what's the deal with this, right? Then I have some insightful content for you. Next is, what are the top priorities for CIOs in 2021? We'll try to understand that as well, and we'll try to understand how cybersecurity is even related to that, right? So what are some key areas which CIOs or CTOs are focusing on 2021? Then we'll spend a good amount of time trying to understand how can you build your own cybersecurity framework, right? Each and every company has their own framework, right? They have their own cybersecurity framework. Microsoft has its own cybersecurity framework, so as other cloud solutions also, right? But how as an organization can go ahead and build your own cybersecurity framework, right? That is something which we will try to understand. And finally, we'll try to understand when to use what and licensing consideration. So that is the core meat of today's session. So let's get started. So as you all know, my name is Vignesh Ganeshan. I've been in the Microsoft 365 space for quite some time. It's been roughly close to 10 years, I would say. I was once a SharePoint practitioner, and then I slowly transitioned into doing Microsoft 365, helping customers migrate to cloud, helping them understand how they need to think about their cloud journey. I worked with components such as SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, OneDrive, a bit amount of work on Power Platform. I used to do security here and there in small pockets, but off late my role transitioned more into looking at hardcore cloud security, where I'm dealing with a lot of Microsoft 365 security components as well as Azure security components, right? So, for a person like me who comes from a hardcore collab, or maybe you want to call it as a workplace background, and he has been transitioned into a cloud security role. If you're one among like me, then maybe this session can help you understand how you need to start looking at all the security solutions and compliance solutions that we have in the Microsoft landscape. So I've been a blogger for quite some time, even though I don't blog a lot of late. So these are some forums where I blog. Then I speak in a plethora of webinars, conferences, and user groups also. I'm a budding writer. I really started this passion of trying to write some technical books also, and I'm a chapter lead for the C Sharp Corner Bangalore chapter, and I'm an ambassador for the AOS community also. And as you could see, I consider myself, I have a mindset of student for life, because if you really wanted to be successful as a IT professional, then it is very, very important to have that mindset. And I'm no different from that. So I've been a C Sharp Corner MVP. I've completed almost 16 plus Microsoft certifications in M365, SharePoint, Windows Server, Active Directory, as well as Azure. And last but not least, I'm the chief organizer of the Microsoft 365 Power Platform and Cloud Security UG India. And also, we're coming up with a new one called as Cloud Ninjas UG as well. So that's a little bit about myself. So let's try to understand your role with your organization, right? I'm going to assume that a lot of people who have joined this session or who are going to view this session recording later, you might be following into one of these buckets. Maybe you're an Office 365 administrator, right? Or you could be an Office 365 developer, or maybe you're a SharePoint administrator, SharePoint developer, or somebody who was doing hardcore Exchange administration for quite some time, and then you transition into a Office 365 administrator. Or maybe you are somebody who was looking into hardcore enterprise voice and collab, and then you started looking into Microsoft Teams also, right? Or maybe you're a security architect. And finally, as I said, you're one among those C-suite professionals, somebody like a CIO, CTO, or CISO, right? So I'm going to assume that you fall under one of these umbrellas, because my session is more tailored towards people who fall under this bucket, right? And once again, if you've already got this figured out, you're welcome to skip. But then what I'm going to assume is, if you're somebody who's coming from a hardcore Office 365 administration background or development background, or right, so a lot of these security and compliance services may or may not make sense to you. I'm going to assume that you might also be having a hard time about where to use a particular solution, right? Because a lot of these products are kind of overlapping. Something which can be used for, let's say, data protection can also be used for device protection also, right? So how do you get this figured out, right? And how do you go about building your own framework? And so what have you been hired for? Now, this is also a question which comes to your mind when you specifically do cybersecurity, right? Maybe you're one among those guys who have been brought on board to help a company build, their own Office 365 setup, or maybe you're a person who's helping companies migrate from their on-prem workload to cloud, or maybe you're the chief innovation officer, chief digital transformation officer, or whatever, right? So maybe you're in one of those roles wherein you are the person who have been brought on board to help an organization figure out their cloud strategy and help them set up their roadmap, right? So I'm going to assume that you also fall under one of these criteria as a part of your role, and maybe that is the job definition that has been given to you. Okay. Next, the top priority for CIOs in 2021, and this is not something which is coming from me. So this is research work which is coming from enterprisesproject.com. The source has been given down there. And if you take a look at this, right, so what they basically say is these are the 5 top priorities for CIOs in 2021, specifically given the fact that we are all operating in the new normal now. And if you look at it, I think this new normal is more or less going to become a normal, because it's been more than a year since we are all operating virtually, and we sort of got used to this new working culture. uh, at this point in time, nobody is not really sure about when we are going to go back to our offices and operate completely from office. We also came up with something called as hybrid workplace, right? Wherein a given amount of people work from office, and then a given amount of people work from home, and then they can switch, right? A lot of things are happening in the specifically in the IT landscape, or no matter whatever domain you represent, right? Now, given this new culture, right, these are the top priorities, and our focus today would be more inclined towards how can you as a person or a professional increase your emphasis on data and cybersecurity, right? Because more than ever before, with the new normal, the importance towards data and cybersecurity has also become, the focus towards this has been more pivoted, and there are a lot of professionals out there who are being hired rigorously for these kind of roles. Because if you look at our new way of working, we are not even within our corporate's perimeter, right? I would say that identity is our new perimeter. We are all sitting in distant locations, and just the workstation that we have, and then we are trying to work with. So, as security professionals, it is our tasked to make sure that our users or our employees or our customers uh, are working without bringing in any damage to companies' data, right? And with this, I would also like to submit a survey result, right? So, and this is once again coming from BCG, which is Boston Consulting Group Remote Work Study, and also Gartner CXO survey. So what that basically says is about 300 million of global office workers are expected to be working from home, right? So, and that's not a small number by any chance if you look at it. And 40% of CIOs indicate that information security is a primary risk, as I was talking about before, right? So with a lot of people working from home, the emphasis towards data security is also clearly becoming a core, a core importance for all the professionals out there. And if you're one among those people, let's say your organization is completely a Microsoft shop. So what I mean by that is you're using Office 365, you're using Microsoft Azure, and then you're using Dynamics 365. When it comes to the on-prem world, you're using Windows servers, Active Directory, which means you're heavily dependent on Microsoft solutions, right? Now, the good part is, guess what, right? So you are using a solution which has been rated as a leader by Gartner's Magic Quadrant. Specifically, if you're looking into the cloud security area, these are the different pillars which Gartner looks at, right? One is identity and access management, CASB, which is your cloud access security broker, information archiving, endpoint, as well as unified endpoint management. So in all these areas, Microsoft is being considered as a leader. And if you look at Microsoft as an organization itself, right? I knew a couple of years back, Microsoft was not specifically looked as a security company, right? They were there in some form or fashion, right? But mostly their security products were more inclined towards governing or controlling Microsoft's cloud. They didn't really have a solution wherein, say, for instance, I can use a security solution to secure a workload which is deployed on AWS, right? That was not the case at all. Any security solution which Microsoft developed was mainly to secure and govern Microsoft's own cloud native solutions. That's how it was for many, many years. And then Microsoft understand the importance to go ahead and show their importance towards cloud security. And guess what? Over the years, they have started to build a lot of solutions in different domains. And today, they have been recognized as a leader by Gartner. Now, while this is all good, right now, these are all really good stuff to hear. And maybe, as I said, if you're Microsoft shop, you really feel that, well, I'm using the best solution, right? I mean, Microsoft is a leader. I'm using their products. I'm using so everything is good. Everything is fine. I don't need to worry at all, right? But I'll tell you what the problem is. So now let's try to understand what is really causing the confusion here, right? What does the current landscape look like? And if you're a person who's specifically dealing with Microsoft 365 and compliance solutions, this is what the current landscape even looks like. And what I'm putting here is just 25% of the existing solutions. But as you can see, there are huge amount of tools and services, right? And mostly what happens is you can see one product which is overlapping with some other domain, or maybe one product which can fit into two different services. And it is just too much for anybody to go ahead and grasp. And if you're coming from a cybersecurity background, may or may not this may make a lot of sense to you. But if you're a person who's coming from a hardcore development background or an IT pro background, or let's say something else, right? And you have been suddenly asked to take over the security side of things, right? These are even too much for you to go ahead and understand, because this clearly requires a cybersecurity background. But that doesn't mean that you're going to struggle here, right? So this is what the current landscape even looks like. And guess what? This doesn't even stop here. That is a lot, right? For one, there are too many admin portals with overlapping components. And this is something which I believe everybody would agree with. The controls, the parameters, and the features, at times when you're seeing it on the security center, you might see an equivalent of that even on the Microsoft Compliance Center as well, right? That's been there for quite some time. Too many changes in the admin portal. Specifically, if you have been working with the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center for quite some time, you know how much changes Microsoft has made to this admin center of late. At least for the past 2-3 years, there has been so many such changes, and it is quite hard for any person to stay on top of it. No proper guidance, right? So even if you go out and look at it today, there is no proper documentation or any proper guidance about how you need to go ahead and use these tools, right? Under what circumstances you should be using a given product, under what circumstances you should be using a given tool. That clarity is not really clear from Microsoft. If you look at their documentations, it talks about, yeah, you have to use this is how you go about it, this is their licensing, but then there's no proper clarity about under what circumstances you're used to use a given tool. Next is, it's not intuitive at all, right? You'll be just sitting in the admin center looking at all the controls, and you're just going to be wondering about, well, how do I go about this, right? So it's not intuitive in nature, according to me. Next is, it's too hard to keep up with Microsoft's release cadence, right? With this increased cloud war between all these big giants such as Microsoft, Amazon, Google, IBM, or maybe other vendors also such as Oracle, so on and so forth, right? They really want to keep up with each other, which is nothing but they end up pushing in a lot of new products and services, and it is quite hard for an average practitioner like us to stay on top of it. And last but not least, frequent name changes. This is something which has been happening off late a lot. Microsoft is known to keep changing their naming conventions quite some time, and unless and until you're somebody who stays on top of these things, you're really going to slip it. And finally, everybody's favorite and my own favorite is understanding the license has always been a nightmare, right? Specifically with the security and compliance products. Even if you go and talk to your Microsoft rep, I haven't seen a scenario wherein the customer is really clear about how the licensing works, specifically with the security and compliance domain. So this is also adding a lot when it comes towards and confusing you, right? Now with this, what I want you to tell is, just don't think that you're alone in this journey, or just don't think that you're the only person who's being confused, right? Because don't worry, because we are all in the same boat here. Everybody is being literally confused. I can pretty much guarantee you that you can't pick any single person and tell that this guy knows everything about how Microsoft 365 security and compliance, how it works, what are the different offerings, how the licensing works, how the product works and all, because that is just too much. And it's quite hard to find one single person who can help you figure out how all these components work, right? Now, how do we go about this? Now that we understand that, yeah, I hear you, Vignesh, right? So I've been struggling the same, right? I'm a global admin. I know these tools, but it's simply not possible for me to go ahead and understand how these products talk to each other, right? Under what circumstances I'm supposed to use what, and most of all, the licensing, which is kind of pretty much confusing to me, right? I'm trying to talk to my partners. I'm trying to talk to my Microsoft sellers. I'm trying to talk to my Microsoft team. There are a huge bunch of people whom I'm trying to talk, but still nobody is able to give me the right guidance on how licensing works, right? So for this, Microsoft has been thinking about this for quite some time, and then they said, you know what, folks, we are coming up with something called as Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture, right? This is something which they have come up with 2 years back, wherein they said, uh, you know what, folks, so as cybersecurity professionals or as people who have been dealing with Office 365, we would like to introduce you to the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture, which looks something like this, right? Well, this is really great, but then if you take a look at this, this totally requires somebody with a proper cybersecurity mindset, right? You see SOC, then you see how do you do security towards hybrid cloud infrastructure, then you see SaaS. Well, even though you get it, you're not really clear about, okay, where exactly do I start? How exactly do I figure out where am I supposed to use what? It's still not, maybe if you're somebody who's starting off newly with this domain, it doesn't really get you what you want, right? And then also on the other side, we have this new thing which a lot of organizations or a lot of players in the market are talking about, which is nothing but your zero trust access control, right? So by zero trust, this is not something which I have to explain to you folks. It simply means that trust nothing and verify everything. So these were the two architectures specifically in the cybersecurity space, right, which Microsoft has brought up. Of course, there has been a version 2 for this also, wherein Microsoft went ahead and they introduced their how things are talking with their trust center, the intelligent security graph, SDL, and there is a lot. Okay, so even though we have a lot of these things, there is a lot of problems. So as a normal big person like me, maybe let's not consider yourself as a cybersecurity rock star, right? So the question is, so what do we do, right? Because my organization has hired me in the first place to come and help me figure out how to go about how to secure things, how to roll out cloud securely, how to deploy SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, or the other components securely. But then still not able to get it, right? So this is what I propose. What I'm proposing is, how about building your own cyber framework? So what do I mean by that? I'm talking about something like this. Okay, just take a quick, I'm gonna leave the slide there for a couple of seconds. Just take a quick look at it. We are trying to make it as simpler as possible. And what I'm talking about is bringing in 5 domains, right? The first domain is identity and access management. The next domain is data protection. Next comes your device protection. Next is logging and monitoring. And finally, we have compliance. Like any cloud product that you can think of should fall under these 5 domains. Of course, you could have one more domain if at all you're thinking about threat protection as a separate. That's quite debatable. Because to me, threat protection can fall between data protection and device protection, right? It can fall under that category. But if you want to consider threat protection as a separate domain also, feel free to do that. But the way this entire framework has been designed is, these are all the different domains that you can think of. And what you see down are all the different subdomains, right? Just think of this, and any cloud for that matter will go ahead and fit into this. If you're talking about Google Cloud, yeah, so even for Google, there would be an identity and access management domain, data protection, device protection, login and monitoring, and compliance. If you're talking about Amazon, yes, this framework will fit in there also. If you're talking about Oracle, if you're talking about IBM, right? Any cloud vendor for that matter who can offer a SaaS solution, specifically to be more specific, this framework will fit there. But I have made it more inclined towards Microsoft 365. But if you want to take this thought process and build a framework for any other solution that you might have, any other cloud vendor that you're dealing with, this would perfectly fit in for that. And on the towards my left hand side, I have the inputs, right? So it could be maybe things such as CIS benchmark, NIST. These might all be very new to you if you're not doing cybersecurity. But these are the inputs that you need to think about, right? I'll be sharing what I mean by CIS, what I mean by NIST, so on and so forth. But just think of these as the inputs. These inputs, when they are given together towards this different kind of domains, the output would be like, you can get your Office 365 assessment done with this, your secure score report, your compliance report. You can also go ahead and figure out what your device strategy, how does your maybe your CISO wants you to pull a report and he wants you to understand, hey, how are we doing on the identity space, right? I want to report about how identity and access, how are we doing on that space? Or maybe I want to get an understanding about how is our endpoint management looking at, right? Anything for that matter, just think of this solution, think of this framework, this will perfectly fit in. And I'm going to spend the next half an hour or so trying to explain the different domains. Let's pick up identity and access management. Let's try to understand what are the different capabilities within that and what is the equivalent Microsoft product, right? Let's then pick up data protection. Let's try to understand what are the different subdomains underneath it and what is the equivalent Microsoft product. And as I said, you could use this for any other cloud vendor, cloud product also. So let's begin with our identity and access management domain, right? So here, what I'm looking at is whatever you're seeing towards your left-hand side, those are the capabilities. And whatever you're seeing towards your right-hand side is the equivalent Microsoft product. And this is sort of my guidance, right? You may or you may not agree with this, right? But if you really want to figure out, or if you really want to sort of uh, put the products into individual buckets so that it is easy for you to understand and it's easy for you to figure out when can I use what. This is really going to help, right? So under identity and access management, I'm going to think of MFA and SSO, conditional access, PIM, PAM, RBAC, whatever, right? Whatever you're seeing towards this, your left-hand side, right? These are common. These are not specific to Microsoft, right? If you go and see Google, so Google has an equivalent product for all these domains. If you go and see Oracle, as I said, right? From Microsoft standpoint, as our session is more inclined towards Microsoft, you can take a look at this when it comes to MFA and SSO, right? I'm talking about Azure AD has its own MFA, right? Then you have the Azure AD SSO, the Azure AD Connect. If you're looking at conditional access, yes, Azure AD has conditional access with it. So basically, let me just show a small demo and walk you through the portal so that you can sort of understand how do I go about this, right? So I'm just bringing in my Office 365 Admin Center here. Once again, This session, I'm not really going to do a demo, a huge deep dive demo, because there is just so much, and it is not really, and the session was not really meant to show you a demo on how these products work, right? This session is totally meant to show you how do you go about thinking about all the solutions. So when I'm talking about Azure Active Directory as a domain, right, which is the identity and access management domain as per our thing here. So we have all this figured out, right? So if I'm going here, you can see a lot of such components. Just think through this lens, right? Maybe if you're going to all services, right? And take a look at this from a security standpoint. This is what I'm majorly focusing at. So you have the Azure AD multi-factor authentication, which is giving you the MFA capability, right? Then if you want to figure out, hey, how do I go about conditional access, right? So maybe I want to give access to Office 365 or maybe Azure or whatever, only based upon certain conditions. It could be scenarios such as maybe when people are coming from within a named location, right, within this particular IP range, right? Or maybe people should be coming only from a computer which is joined to my domain. For things of that sort, you can go ahead and leverage your conditions. These are based upon certain conditions. You would be granted access, right? Then we also have things such as your, say for instance, if you're thinking in lines of privileged identity management and privileged access management, right? Now, what I mean by PIM is this, as the name itself says, this is for privileged access. When I say privileged access, these are for high level roles. Maybe think of you having access such as global admin or SharePoint admin or OneDrive admin or Exchange admin or Teams admin, something of that sort, right? So these are really heavy privileges to carry. And you really want to make sure that this sort of access is given to you only whenever it is required and there is no standing access granted to you. What I mean by that is, even though you're a person, like let's consider that you're the principal architect who has been brought on board to roll out Office 365. The organization trusts you. They're giving you global admin access. But it's quite possible that an attacker can go after your account and he can crack the credentials and he can cause permanent damage towards your organization's data. And that's the last thing you want, right? Because if something of that nature happens, then guess what? You're going to be, it's as simple as you getting fired. And that's the last thing that you want to happen to you. So in that cases, you can think of privileged identity management, which is more of a workflow kind of a scenario, right? So based upon certain, you can just go ahead and have just in-time access. Now, if I just go back here, and if I'm looking at all services, um, let me just search. Yeah, here it is, Azure AD Privileged Identity Management, right? So you can just say, for instance, you want to get this access, a workflow gets triggers, it goes to your boss or whomever. Say, for instance, you want to be an Exchange admin, right? And maybe that over the weekend you want to do some work on Exchange admin. Maybe you're migrating mailboxes, you want to pull some report towards Exchange admin, something which you want to do, right? Or maybe you're configuring some new transport rules for that matter, right? And you want to do it over the weekend, right? So in that case, there can be a workflow which kicks in, and that workflow is going to ask you, all right, so what kind of role you might need, for how much time you might need, and what is the work that you're going to perform. And in some companies, I've seen a scenario wherein they would even put in the change ticket number, so it sort of matches, right? It goes to your boss, or maybe it could be whomever in your organization who is the higher up. He sort of goes through that workflow. He validates all the requests that you're asking for, and then he gives you access. It's only after then you go ahead and do whatever work you have to do, and that's it. Once the time is done, let's say they're giving you access for 4 hours. After 4 hours, you're out of the system. So this is what I mean by privileged identity management. Your access itself is going for somebody to be verified, and only then you get access, right? On the other side, you also have something called as privileged access management. Now, I've seen a lot of people who confuse themselves between PIM and PAM. So PAM is, just think of a solution such as Thycotic, right? If at all you've dealt with Thycotic server, right? This is, just think of PAM as a safe, right? If you're a Microsoft practitioner, right, we have something called as the Azure Key Vault, right? So your credentials get stored into that. You have to go and check out your credentials, the password for a service account or any account for that matter, and only then you can use it. Same is what a privileged access management means. Just think of a scenario wherein all the admin accounts are stored within that safe. You have to log in, you have to check out the password, and that password keeps rotating once in every 12 hours, which means nobody knows what that password is. It is the system which generates that password, right? Then you take in that password, you feed it into the system, then you gain access, then you do whatever work you want to perform, and that's it, it's done. After 12 hours, that password gets rotated. This is what I mean by privileged access management, right? So you need to think in those lines and figure out what exact solution would work for you, right? So in the Microsoft space, specifically with Azure AD, we have PIM, and privileged access management, it requires a component of MIM. So specifically, I don't see Microsoft having a very good solution when it comes to PAM. And that's the reason why you would see a lot of companies looking into solutions such as Thycotic, and there are a lot of other PAM vendors who offer a solution like this. But I'm saying Thycotic because Thycotic is known as the leader when it comes to a PAM solution. Then we also have RBAC. These are all built in RBAC. Maybe whatever role which comes out of the box doesn't fulfill your need, you can go to RBAC. B2B, B2C, this is something which I don't need to explain. Everybody understands this. Then identity governance and identity protection. This is of uber importance, right? People have the access, but you want to know what people are doing with that access, right? Are they accessing the right set of information that they have, that they should be accessing? Are they having standing access for it? Say, for instance, you have invited a partner from a different tenant and you have shared something with him on SharePoint, right? So you realize that he should be having access only for a week, because maybe the work that he's going to do just requires 1 week. You granted access to him, and guess what? You just forgot to revoke the access. So those kind of things can be captured using your Azure AD identity governance, right? So you can tell, like, this is the access, and after so and so date, I want this access to be revoked. So those kind of governance towards what kind of privileges you're giving can be captured using your Azure AD identity governance. Then you have the identity protection. This was something which was newly added to Azure AD, which has a lot of machine learning and other components towards it. So identity protection is also an important area. So SSPR and audit logging, of course, there has been a lot of SSPR solutions in the market for a very long time, but from Azure AD, we have Azure AD SSPR. It requires a different set of licensing, so please be mindful of that. So if you're a person who is interested to explore more on these areas, then you can always go ahead and you can figure out your Azure AD pricing, right? So go start looking at your Azure AD pricing, and then you can figure out which thing you want to go with, right? So, and once again, this also keeps changing very frequently, the pricing details also. So the way Microsoft has categorized this is there is always a free component of Azure AD that you would get. What I mean by that is Azure AD is the identity and access management solution for any Microsoft cloud for that matter, right? Microsoft has three clouds. It has your Office 365 or M365, then it has Microsoft Azure, then it also has Dynamics 365, right? So no matter whichever cloud you're using, your identity and access management solution across these three clouds is always Azure AD. Then when you're purchasing Office 365 licensed version, then you get a Azure AD component with that. That is something that you would get. Then you have the premium ones, the Azure AD Premium P1 and P2. So based upon what you want, what kind of features you're looking at, you should choose which one you want to go with. So specifically, if you're looking for P2, as I said, the identity protection and identity governance, it comes along with your P2. So this is something which you need to be very, very mindful about, right? Now, let's try to, now that we understand, like, these are, so this, as I said, right, I really didn't want to go and do a full-fledged demo on all these components. My idea here is just to show you what are the different capabilities and what is an equivalent Microsoft product for it. That's it, right? We can do detailed sessions on all these things at a later point in time, or in maybe upcoming sessions and all. But this session was not clearly meant for that. And let's say if you are not a Microsoft shop, let's think of a scenario like that, right? Maybe you're using Office 365, but then you have not purchased a PIM solution, which is from Microsoft. Maybe you have not purchased a PAM solution, which is not from Microsoft. Maybe you're not purchased a threat protection solution, which is from Microsoft, right? Then these are the other players which are there in this space. Of course, we all know Okta, and Okta, for that matter, was the very first IAM solution to be cloud only, and they are a very huge competitor towards Microsoft, specifically in the IAM space, right? Then we have Ping Identity, specifically if you're looking at Federation, right? When I say Federation, we had ADFS for a very, very long time. Then we had Azure AD SSO, and now Ping Identity is also a very good competitor in that space. Then, of course, we have a lot of other vendors. You have SailPoint, Oracle, IBM, Google Cloud, IAM, so Micro Focus, Auth0, right? So this slide is for those people who are not a Microsoft shop. Maybe your organization or your customer is not a Microsoft shop, but they're still looking for these kind of capabilities. Then they can start investing on these tools also, right? Maybe that could be various reasons. Maybe pricing is a concern, or maybe you don't want to be heavily dependent on Microsoft, right? From an architect standpoint, if you look at, if you talk to some architects, they simply don't want to go with only one single vendor, right? They want to make sure that they want to have an equivalent amount of Microsoft Azure, then they want to have an equivalent amount of, let's say, Amazon, then they want to have an equivalent amount of Google also. We call this as polycloud or multi-cloud in the industry, right? So if that is the kind of nature, then these are the other players in this space. Next is we have the data protection domain, right? Once again, the same theory applies here. Whatever you're seeing towards your left-hand side, that is sort of an industry standard. And whatever you're seeing towards your right-hand side, that is the equivalent Microsoft product. So from a DLP standpoint, Microsoft has its own DLP, the Office 365 DLP, which can help to protect data across your SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive. It has it in Teams. Now, off late, I think Microsoft has also released a unified DLP, which can also sort of protect the content that you're storing in your hard drives, in your computers also. For many, many years, Symantec was ruling this space, right? Symantec was known as a leader in the DLP area for a very long time, but Microsoft is coming up with their own unified DLP. When you talk about data discovery, of course, Mcas, which is nothing but Microsoft's own CASB solution. So if when I say data discovery, right? So Mcas can help to go and figure out what are the different kind of data which is living within your tenant, what kind of sensitive informations people have, and then it can sort of help to figure out that. Then from a data classification standpoint, right? Maybe you want to classify documents such as this is internal only, right? This is confidential content. For things of that sort, we have the Azure Information Protection versus the MIP. I'll try to help you understand what is the difference between AIP versus MIP, and why Microsoft is leaning more towards MIP, at least towards the past couple of months after I think last Ignite you would see Microsoft pushing a lot towards MIP, and they made it very clear that AIP will be slowly going away. Right. So we'll try to talk in detail about why is MIP getting a lot of focus. Then CASP, as I said, MCAS. And if you're looking at email security and malware detection, we all knew if you're coming from an exchange background, right? EOP was there for many, many years, an exchange online protection, which comes by default as long as you're taking any exchange, if you're taking an exchange online plan. And then Microsoft came up with something called as Microsoft Defender for Office 365 at last Ignite. For data protection, these are the equivalent Microsoft products that we have, and for data archive and data retention. So just to help you understand how you would navigate through these solutions once again in the admin center, right? So these are all point solutions. When I say point solutions, these are only meant to fix that given problem. So if I go here to the security center, you can see Microsoft, you have DLP, data discovery, and there is a lot which comes along with that. And by the way, I'm running an E5 tenant, right? So in your case, if at all you're not seeing something which I'm seeing, that could be a reason due to a license. So make sure that you're running the proper licensing for that. So you have the data loss prevention, wherein you can go ahead and create whatever policies that you want to create, right? So from a policy standpoint, you can go with these kind of templates, which is readily available, or you can create your own custom policy and create your own regex patterns, right? So say for instance, maybe if you're a company who wants to be more specific towards India PII and PHI information, such as your Aadhaar card or PAN card, you may not really find that here, wherein you can go ahead and create your own custom policy. And then you can also go ahead and choose what kind of location this should look at, right? So this is what you can get to do from a DLP standpoint. Next is your MCAS, which is nothing but Microsoft's own CASB solution. So Microsoft has got into this world. I think Microsoft MCAS is roughly 3 to 4 years old, if I'm not wrong. Right. So this is their MCAS. I think something is wrong with the. Let me. Uh, Cloud App MCAS login. Yeah, Microsoft Cloud App Security Portal. So this is nothing but Microsoft's own CASB solution, and just make sure that you have a proper E5 license, because there is a part of cloud Microsoft's CASB which requires E3, specifically the app discovery, and then there is a part of Microsoft's CASB which requires E5. So make sure that you're having the right set of license. So as I said, your CASB is mainly to help you with your shadow IT, wherein you want to understand what are the different kind of third-party SaaS apps which people are using, right? and also it helps you to discover. And there is a lot of good things. And if at all you want to integrate this with maybe your Defender, you want to push those logs and alerts towards Caspi, you can just simply come here. Maybe if you want to push in your Defender for identity alerts to Caspi, right? So you go to the settings and then you can configure it however you want. But just be mindful that from domain standpoint, from a data discovery standpoint, Mcas is the solution that you can use when it comes to the Microsoft stack of solutions, right? And then of course EOP and a data archive and data retention. For this also you have, this is once again coming with your MIP. Now say for instance, if I go back here, I'm just gonna simply flip. If I go to security, and then you would see this unified labeling concept, which is coming a classification. Then you have sensitivity labels. So this particular component is what I called as unified label. Because if you look at Microsoft before, they had a component called as AIP, Azure Information Protection, which is only meant to protect the data that you have in your SharePoint, in your email or Office files, right? You can classify that file as internal or highly confidential. When you're sharing a file which says highly confidential and that goes to a person who's outside of your organization, then you can create some protection saying that that person may not be able to download it, or that person cannot forward it to somebody else. So those kind of things. That's what I mean by AIP. Now, AIP was there for a very long time. Now, Microsoft recently came up with something called as an MIP, which is nothing but a unified label. So what I mean by unified label is it's one single label which can take care of your information protection, the one which I just spoke about. And it also can help to sort of classify the data. What I mean by classifying the data, right? If I say, think of this, I can create a label like something like test label, right? Display name can be the same. I can give display name description for users, whatever you want to give. I'm giving the same description for admins. I'm giving the same. This is just for demo purpose. And you can scope this label to anything, right? Now, say for instance, I can scope this label to file and emails, or I can even scope this label to group and sites. Now, what happens when I'm scoping this label to a group and site? That, let's say for instance, if I'm marking a particular SharePoint site as highly confidential, then even the owner, or no matter whomever it is, he cannot make that site so that it can be externally be shareable, right? What that simply means is I cannot have guest members as a part of that site, because that site itself has been marked as highly confidential. You can do the same for Teams. You can do the same for Microsoft 365 groups, so on. And so that's what I mean by unified label. It doesn't just look only into your files. You can also extend it towards your group and sites. And then you also have it for your Azure purview also. This is specifically if you're dealing with SQL, Azure SQL, right? And then on the other side, we also have retention labels. Now, retention is a huge deal for many organizations, specifically if you're with healthcare or those sort of domains wherein you have to retain customers' data, or maybe you need to flush out data after a certain point in time, right? For those kind of scenarios, you can go ahead and create all these kind of labels and take advantage of that also. And then you can also go ahead and classify your sensitive info types, about what kind of info types that you want to create, right? It can be, these are all the different uh, kind of PHI and PI information that you can have. And if something which you're looking for is not that, you can also go ahead and create your own pattern that I was talking about. So this is what we have from a data protection domain. And to help you understand the other players in this space, so these are some well-known vendors who offer the equivalent capability of what Microsoft can offer, right? As I said, Symantec has been a leader in DLP. Then you have Proofpoint, which is known, which is sort of a rock star among Exchange practitioners, specifically known for their email gateway solutions, right? Then you have Borden James, Vitress, McAfee, Netscope, BitClass, and Mimecast, right? And whatever names I'm giving here, this is according to Gartner's report, right? Now, if at all you're not seeing one of those solutions that you're using here, it's not that I'm telling that's a right or wrong solution. This is as per Gartner's a magic quadrant details. Then we also have the device protection domain. This domain, you know, it's very new to me in the first place, because this requires a proper modern desktop mindset, right? For people who have been dealing with SCCM for a very long time, this will make a lot of sense to them. But you need to also understand that device protection also, it's a huge pillar when it comes to the cybersecurity space, right? So of course we all know Microsoft Intune. So anybody who's been dealing with mobile device management and mobile access management, we all understand Microsoft Intune. But what you need to understand is it just doesn't stop there, right? Microsoft, with their new branding, they also came up with something called as the Microsoft Configuration Manager, and under this branding, they're bringing their Endpoint Manager, Endpoint Configuration Manager. These are all meant to how you can go ahead and protect the data which is stored in your Windows 10 devices, in your mobile endpoints, right? So those kind of things. That is what the device protection domain mainly talks about. And there are a lot of other things. As I said, this is a domain which I've recently started picking up, and maybe couple of months from now, I should be able to give you a proper deep dive on all these products and do a full-fledged session. But just for the purpose of this session, please do understand that device protection in itself is its own domain, and these are the different equivalent Microsoft products which Microsoft has to offer. Other players in this space, we all know VMware AirWatch. I think there are a lot of customers who have been using VMware for a very, very long time. Their AirWatch component is very well known in the market for MDM and MAM. Then we have Mobile Iron, once again very well known for their mobile device management capabilities. IBM BigFix, which was an equivalent of SCCM, for it was giving a tough compete for SCCM, but just that there was not a lot of focus, and a lot of companies transitioned to SCCM, and now we are looking at Windows Endpoint Configuration Manager, so on and so forth. JAMF Pro, specifically if you're a customer who's dealing with a lot of Mac endpoints, for you to manage all those Mac devices, you would need this. Okay. Our next domain is logging and monitoring. This is specifically for people who are into the SOC, Security Operations Center, right? What I mean by that is people who are dealing with SIM, XDR, for those kind of capabilities, right? So this is also an important area when it comes to the cybersecurity domain. So the capabilities that I'm talking about is audit logging, SIM, cloud security posture management, security for IoT, alerts, and XDR. And these are the equivalent Microsoft products, right? At times you might be seeing that one product or one particular equivalent product can be following across different domains, but that is the way it is, right? So you would see Mcas as a part of data protection, you would see Mcas, which is a CASB, and then you would also see Mcas as a part of alerts also. That's how it has been designed. But from last Ignite onwards, Microsoft made their way into the XDR business, right? So extended detection and response, this is nothing but a term which Gartner has coined. And if you look at it, right, your threat can be coming maybe to your endpoints, maybe to your emails, maybe to your data. It could be in any form or fashion. Attackers might be targeting any of these, right? So for many, many years, a lot of security operation centers or a lot of professionals who are dealing with security, they were all looking at this as individual solutions, right? Maybe somebody would be dealing only with securing identities. Maybe a different team will be dealing with only securing email and exchange. Then there will be a different set of team who's sort of dealing with device protection. Now, Microsoft XDR, with this, Microsoft made their way into the XDR business. This is nothing but how do you bring all these capabilities under one single umbrella, right? So it is just not extended detection, it is also about response, right? Detection happens, and how do you respond to that, right? So that is what XDR means. And these are the different products that we have. Just to just give you a walkthrough of what I'm talking about here. Once again, if we go here, threat management is one such area which I would like to bring here, right? So if you basically go to threat management, you will see a lot of such protection. And from last Ignite onwards, Microsoft was bringing their XDR branding across all these solutions, which is why you would see this as Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Then you have Microsoft Defender for endpoints, so on and so forth. So with this, say for instance, there are a couple of things that you can go ahead and do. Policies. Let me click on policy. These are all the different kind of policies that you can create. Now if I go to safe attachment, right, you can create a policy for safe attachment. So these could be attachments which are being stored in your email, right? So when an attachment comes, what you want to do with those attachments. And all these things are an extended version of what we used to have in EOP for many, many years. If you're an exchange practitioner, we would be we would be using all those transport rules, leveraging EOP, right? What happens to an attachment, or when a mail is coming from a given domain, whitelist, blacklisted domain, what do you want to do with that? Email quarantine, message trace, so on and so forth, right? So now all these things are being bought under Microsoft Defender for Office 365. This is how this looks like. And the other players in this space, are Splunk, IBM. So Splunk has been ruling the SIM market for many years, right? So that's why you would see a lot of SIM professionals, SIM professionals coming from a Splunk background. And even IBM Curator has been in the market for a very long time. They have been known as the leaders in the SIM market for a very long time. And if you want to know what is Microsoft's SIM, that's nothing but Azure Sentinel. I think it's been more than a year and a half Microsoft has got into this market. Microsoft didn't have a SIEM before. So Sentinel was their way of getting into the Sentinel and into the SIEM business. Then these are the other vendors who we have in this space. So once again, if you are not a Microsoft shop, then these are the other players that you can start looking at. And if at all you're using any of these solutions, then you can also have this integrated with your Office 365. It's just a matter of creating that connection. And from that moment onwards, all the logs or anything that is getting reported will be reported into your Splunk or IBM Curator stuff also. And then we also have the compliance domain. So this is an area which not a lot of us have been paying close attention to, right? Because compliance it was sort of its own thing, right? In many organizations, you would see compliance being dealt by HR professionals, or there would be a proper person who takes care of e-discovery. There was a proper team dedicatedly sitting to take care of all these kind of concerns, right? But uh, now with compliance becoming very close to security, specifically in the Microsoft 365 space, it is very important for you to understand what are the different products which Microsoft has under the compliance umbrella also. And you can split it under four different umbrellas. One is information protection and governance, insider risk management, discover and respond, and final is compliance management. Right. So just to give you an overview, we all understand the Microsoft information protection, the MIP. I'll be talking about that just after a couple of slides from now. I'll be talking in detail about what do you mean by MIP and how is that different from AIP. Then we have DLP for teams. So when we talk about DLP, what you need to clearly understand is there is a DL. First of all, Teams is a product which brings together your SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, everything. So it is one single product which has everything underneath it, right? And the Office 365 DLP was traditionally meant to take care of only the Exchange, OneDrive, and SharePoint components, right? But then this question came up, right? Hey, how do I take care of content which is being shared on the Teams chat? Maybe somebody is asking me my Amex number. I'm just putting it on the chat. The operant person gets it. And you don't want people sharing Amex card numbers or credit card numbers over a Teams chat, right? So how do you go ahead and stop those kind of things? For that is where we have the DLP for Teams chat. Please be mindful that whatever I'm talking about here, this needs a proper licensing. This doesn't fall under your Office 365 E3, E1. Of course, E5, you would be getting everything. But if you're not a E5 shop, then there is a different licensing pattern for this. I'll be talking about the licensing in detail. But please be mindful that you always go ahead and verify those licenses before you start using these tools or before you start recommending these tools to your customers. Then the endpoint DLP, which we spoke about. Specifically, insider risk management is a new area which Microsoft has invested from last year onwards. So what I mean by insider risk management is just think of a scenario wherein you have resigned from your company. Let's say you resigned yesterday, right? Typically, what happens is the moment you resign, and let's say you're going to a competitor, right? In Microsoft, I used to see scenarios like, let's say people are resigning from Microsoft, and if they're going to Google or Amazon, the first thing that they would do is they would go ahead and disable your accounts. That's it. As a Microsoft employee, if you're going to a competitor, your account gets disabled, and you won't even have access to anything. The only thing that you'll be having access on the last day is you can go ahead and collect your pay slips. That's it. Nothing else apart from that, right? Now, this could be the case with any other company also, right? Because risk shouldn't necessarily be coming only from external people. Risk can be coming also from inside people also, right? Maybe your own employees. Maybe they want to download some IPs which you might have created, some kind of important customer information or anything related to products, some important source codes or whatever, right? So you have this insider risk management solution now, and it is basically built on top of your Microsoft security graph. What this basically does is it kicks a workflow. Say, for instance, if you have been resigned, it starts looking, and you can kick this workflow, and it will start off looking into what are the different kind of works that you're doing, what kind of data that you're downloading, right? And if at all it feels that something is really terrible or something you're doing something against the law of the land, then it's going to trigger a workflow, and all the HR people and all the other people are going to be notified that you're doing something with a malicious intent. So if you're so next is the insider risk management. Then we have the communication compliance also. So for this, it's say for instance, you want to make sure that people are following a proper guidance when it comes to when they're writing emails or when they're using Yammer chats and all, just to make sure that there is no workplace harassment, there is not, you don't want to give room for profanity, things of that sort. Then you can use communication compliance. So these are all the different kind of solutions that you have from an insider risk management standpoint. Discover and respond, of course, for e-discovery purposes when you want to consider do investigation. An advanced audit, that has been an area which customers have been asking Microsoft for a very long time, because the auditing that you get in Microsoft, any kind of auditing, right, it can live only for 90 days. And if you wanted anything beyond that, either you should be shipping those logs to a SIM and you can do that. But with advanced audit, your logs, your user audit logs can live up to 1 year, and Microsoft is working on retaining and making it up to 10 years also. So there are some companies who want to store their logs and keep it up to 1 year. So if you're one of those customers, start looking into advanced audit. And of course, your compliance manager, which is going to help to figure out whether how is the compliance posture of your company looking at. So those kind of things can be taken care of by that. And once again, the other players in this space. So these are the other vendors who offer an equivalent solution of how Microsoft offers their thing, specifically on the compliance space. Next is, I'll just take 5 minutes to explain the Office 365 licenses for this. And this is something which I share the slide with you. You folks can go ahead and look at it. But this sort of makes it very easy for you to understand how Microsoft has created their solutions, right? Because if you look at Microsoft's licensing portal, they don't really sort of get granular about what you get and what you don't get. But these kind of things are there, just to be mindful of the time. I'm just showing you all these things, but later when you get the slides, you can go through this, and you can, based upon whatever licensing plan that you're on, you can go ahead and look into this. So new services and other things, as I said, the Microsoft Defender, which Microsoft introduced last Ignite onwards. So Defender comes under two categories. You have the Microsoft Defender for Microsoft 365. Next is your Azure Defender also. This is basically nothing but a rebranding which Microsoft has done, and this is their way of getting into the XDR market, right? Which was heavily controlled by McAfee and other players in the world. So whatever you see here for Defender for Endpoint, it was formerly called as MDATP, and Defender for Office 365, it was formerly called as Office 365 ATP, and it is completely up for you to go ahead and view it. But please be mindful that Microsoft, when I say Microsoft Defender, it is not a product, it is not a SKU, it is not a something, it is just a branding under which a lot of these capabilities are coming together. These are some new Ignite announcements that Microsoft has made. You can go ahead and take a look at this later when the slides are being shared. And yeah, so I'll just take a minute to explain this. So what really happens is there is a lot of confusion between AIP versus MIP, right? And what you really need to understand is MIP in itself is not a product. MIP in itself is not a new licensing plan. MIP, it's nothing but it's a framework. So what I mean by that is AIP is a subcomponent of MIP. And for you to take the complete functionality of MIP, these are the products that you need, right? If you take a look at this, you would just see Azure Information Protection as a subcomponent of MIP. And these are all the different things that you need in order for you to get the complete functionality of MIP. So if you are one such customer who has started exploring MIP, this should be very, very important to you. You can take a look at this and figure out whether you have the right set of license. Okay. Information barrier in teams. This is something about how you can build an ethical wall between two different teams in an organization, right? Say for instance, if you want people from one team shouldn't be talking to a people from a different team. There should not be any kind of communication at all. No chat, no document sharing, no meeting, no calling, nothing, right? And of course you would see these kind of nature in the banking sector, and if that is culture, that is something which your customer or your organization is looking at, then you should start looking at Microsoft Teams information barrier, because this is a solution which was specifically built for that. And this requires your Microsoft E5 compliance licensing. So please take a look at it. And finally, we are being at the top of the hour. To conclude, this is what I'm saying. So remote work is here to stay, whether you like it or not. It is what it is, and it is going to stay. And with remote work, cybersecurity is being the top priority for many organizations in the new normal, because as I said, you're not within your organization's uh, perimeter, right? Your maybe your username and password is your new perimeter. That's the way you need to start looking at it. And with this new culture, cybersecurity is becoming a top priority. And you don't really need to be coming from a cybersecurity background to deal with cloud security. So that's something which you need to understand. But understanding the usage of services is very, very important, right? So that is one thing which you should be really, really good with. And next thing is, your organization may not be a Microsoft shop, because a lot of organizations are simply not that way. But if you're able to identify and build your own cyber framework, then your chances of becoming a rockstar professional, cybersecurity professional, is very, very high. And finally, to conclude, in the world of Microsoft Cloud, security and compliance, it is just not Microsoft's responsibility, it is your responsibility also. And this is that one single slide which speaks about what are the things which Microsoft controls and what are the things which you as a customer should control. Microsoft is always the custodian of your data. They are not meant to take care of everything. There are certain things which you can catch Microsoft hold, you can catch them responsible for, and there are some things which they can't do anything about. So please be very, very mindful about that. So with that, I'm done with my session.